Tell me a speedrunning opinion, they'll have you like this. A while ago, I tweeted this because I was bored at work and I really wanted to engagement bait. So what better way to celebrate the holidays than to read some of the spiciest speedrunning takes I saw on Twitter that afternoon. Starting off, we've got an interesting take from Dragon Blitz, a renowned Castlevania speedrunner and up-and-coming speedrunning YouTuber. In-game time speedruns will always be subject to strats that are slower in real time, but faster in-game time, so they are much closer to a high score run than they are to a speedrun. This is a really interesting take to start off with, because most speedruns today are RTA, or real-time attack. This means that you use an external timer, like LiveSplit, to time the start of the run all the way to the end of the run. But back in the day, a lot of people would speedrun games that had in-game timers. Some of them had inaccuracies, like your Pokemon games, but some of them are really accurate. Obviously, your Mario Kart time trials are going to be in-game time, but things get interesting when you get to speed games that still use in-game time as their main leaderboard metrics. Case in point, Metroid Prime games. The Metroid Prime games have an in-game timer that times hours and minutes. The in-game time in Metroid Prime rounds down to the closest minute, meaning that if you get a time of, let's say, 49:58, that'll count as just 49 minutes on the leaderboard. From what I've seen, this in-game timer is pretty accurate, but there are some strats that I've seen where they do some pause buffering, which pauses the in-game timer, which could lead to some inaccuracies where I could see why it feels more like a high score comparison than an actual speedrun. Similarly, the GoldenEye community runs a bunch of individual levels and they use the in-game timer as well, which rounds down to the nearest second. Often in some of these runs, you'll see the runners pause the game to pull up the watch in order to equip an item required for a certain objective. The in-game timer is paused when this menu is pulled up, and there have actually been some world records in the past that have kind of stalled here for a bit to, kind of calm down your nerves and whatnot. In that sense, I could really see where Dragon Blitz comes from, and I can agree at some parts it does feel more like a high score than a speedrun, but at the end of the day, it's not like a lot of people are abusing this rapidly. It was also a discussion in Minecraft, but I think most people keep the pausing to the minimum to try to, get more attempts in. So I sort of half agree with this sentiment. Cheating should be allowed/encouraged. Obviously, that's a joke answer, but on the other hand, if you did allow a speedrun category that allows cheating, it would probably lead to some pretty interesting and funny results. Case in point, there's a category extension on the Twilight Princess leaderboard called Moon Jump. This side category run allows the use of a cheat code that allows Link to moon jump when a certain button is pressed. As you could imagine, the moon jump allows you to skip most of the game, more than the actual speedrun. While an ordinary Twilight Princess any percent speedrun abuses a lot of glitches, it is still barely under the 3-hour mark. But with the moon jump cheat code, you could beat it in under half an hour, and I think that's really funny. Obviously, stuff like this should be relegated to a category extension rather than the main leaderboard. But I mean, what does it matter? YouTube comments think that we cheat all the time just because we use glitches, even though we're not using any cheat codes. Turbo runs should be allowed and encouraged for every game. Can make it a separate category if needed. In recent years, turbo controllers have been a hot discussion within the speedrun community, as they're seen as a replacement for button mashing, which some people view as a legitimate skill, while others see it as a very big barrier to entry for certain speed games that is quite physically demanding and unfair to those that just don't have the capabilities of doing so. On the other hand, people go out of their way to buy consoles from different regions or different versions of the game that weren't released in their country in order to get a competitive advantage. Not to mention that a lot of communities don't see mashing as the end-all be-all skill, as a lot of people do. Recently, I've seen a lot of RPG speedruns in particular allow the use of turbo to mash through text boxes quicker, especially if the runs are like hours long, where by the end of it, you can imagine your thumb is like really tired. A lot of the time when turbo is allowed, there is sometimes a compromise. Metroid Dread, for example, limits the turbo frequency that you can use. Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga allows turbo only for text boxes. There's a bros ability that people use in combat, which is especially useful against endgame bosses called Chopper Bros, in which you do more damage the faster you hit the A button. For Chopper Bros, I can see why Turbo is banned for this, because it's a legitimate skill to try to get as many hits in as possible. But on the other hand, if you're allowing it for text boxes, why not just go all the way? But hey, that's not for me to decide. Speedruns that abuse major glitches, like Air Swim and Sekiro, ruin the run and are boring as hell to watch. You skip so much of the game that you're barely playing it and it doesn't look fun. I absolutely hate this kind of mindset. People especially have made this argument for why certain speed games fell off, such as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, because of broken glitches such as stale reference manipulation and arbitrary code execution. These are glitches that are so powerful you can't really ignore, so the any percent run will be really fast and abuse some of these tricks that trivialize a lot of movement or entire segments of the game. But the reason why I disagree with this take, because any percent is not the only category. Often when there are major glitches found in a speed run, they will make separate categories that restrict said glitches, and those categories end up being the most competitive. And because those categories exist, I just feel like it's dishonest to say that an entire speed game is ruined just because there's this broken glitch that makes any percent, or any equivalent to that, boring to watch. One boring category does not mean that it has to be the competitive category. Glitches should be banned from speedrunning because they are not intended by the developers of the game, and they don't let you experience the game the way it was meant to be played. If you couldn't tell based on my history of posting about heavily glitched speedruns, I disagree strongly. Glitches can make a run more interesting, trim the fat from some of the more boring segments of it, can introduce some really cool movement mechanics, some really cool skips that are just fun to pull off and watch. And the best part is you don't need to cheat to do it. You could do it with a regular copy of the game. That's why glitches in speedrunning is so magical, because it's the vanilla game that's unmodified and anyone can do it. The argument for developer intent is invalid because the core of speedrunning, to beat the game as fast as possible for a lot of games, is not the developer's intent. Yet, people do it anyways, and no matter how hard you try to stop them, speedrunners will find a way. Most categories that aren't any percent, 100%, or low percent are a waste of time. This is an incredibly narrow perspective on speedrun categories, and I suggest you take a look at the wide variety of categories a game offers. People have the same black and white mentality for a lot of games. It's either any percent or 100%. I just recommend you check what's in between, because you could find some really cool speedruns. To prove my point further, 16 star in Super Mario 64 is neither any percent nor 100%, yet it still manages to be the most popular category in the game to be run, and its world record has been highly celebrated. But 16 stars not any percent is 0 star. Yet people run this anyways because it's a fun legacy category and people still enjoy it. I can't really call that a waste of time. Summoning Salt videos are getting old. I can't really agree with this take because Summoning Salt releases his videos months apart because he takes such a long time to research and write them. I would agree with this take more if it was like his early days in 2017, when he was just pumping out video after video like a factory without really putting much effort into his research or editing quality. But as he grew more as a creator, you could see the amount of extra effort he put in to improve his video quality, his script writing quality. Even to this day, he's making improvements to make each new video better than the last. If you're talking about the music choice or the formatting where it's like, this record was unstoppable, and the community said the game was dead, but then Buttlicker69 comes in with a fresh new strat and sets a new world record, and the competition is reignited once again. Obviously, I'm just exaggerating for stuff, but I mean, it's a formula that works, and even if the formula stays the same, the stories themselves are different and interesting enough to where I cannot agree at all. I'd rather have a bad time than have a bad time. So true. Speedrunning is supposed to be fun after all. Speaking of that, we got a take that says, leaderboards don't matter. Arbitrary rules are stupid. Stop taking shit so seriously. Get good at your game and stop complaining about shit that doesn't matter. I love competition, but arguing if we need pee breaks in a 3-hour run does nothing. I mean, if you're running such a long category and you don't want to have to do it all in one take and you want to take pee breaks or sleep breaks, you're not obligated to submit it to a leaderboard. You do you. You're not tied to any leaderboard unless you're trying to compete on there. You don't need to submit your times on a leaderboard to be a speedrunner. On that note, not letting me take a minute or two to go pee in an 8-hour speedrun without it affecting my time does nothing to keep the sanctity of the run, and you're not a better runner because you force yourself not to take advantage of your breaks, for real. Personally, I cannot believe that there are people that run leaderboards with categories that span over 12 hours that don't allow pee breaks. I can understand certain exceptions such as a relay marathon race such as the 602, but for something as long as, let's say, Breath of the Wild 100%, especially if you're new to the category, I think that implementing breaks should be a no-brainer, even on the leaderboard. Some people might think it's unfair to those that do those long runs in one sitting, but I don't think it should be at the expense of people that just don't have that ability. Plus, it's just not always good for you. The human body is not meant to sit for that long of a time. But those that do, I cast no judgment. If you know your own limits, I can't stop you. There are other games to speedrun than just Super Mario 64. In other news, water is wet. But for real though, I don't want to sound like a hypocrite considering that I've made a lot of SM64 videos, know a lot of SM64 runners, and I'm gonna post an SM64 video after this soon, but goodness, I am just sick of seeing popular streamers pick up speedrunning for the first time and just default to running SM64 16 star. It feels like the equivalent of Harry Potter in speedrunning. Read a different book. I mean, I get it. It's a very popular speedrun and a lot of people do it, but I just feel like there's a lot of games that don't get the attention they deserve. And I feel like those games might actually be a better introduction to a lot of those people to speedrunning. That's why it was really cool seeing Summit1G like take his hands at running Max Payne 3 out of all games. So no shade to Mario 64. I get that a lot of people place a lot of value on that game, maybe overvalue it slightly, and I feel kind of responsible for that. I just think that variety would benefit a lot of people's palates a bit more. Performing a speedrun without all the optimized strats and or best route is sometimes more beneficial, and the people who scrutinize runners for not doing so need to touch grass. 100% agree with that. Especially for newer runners, you're better off focusing on improving your movement rather than focusing on a big trick that you see a lot of top runners do. Even for top runners, it's valid to put off learning a hard strat at first, because it's just really difficult and it's not worth going for unless you're going for a world record. And even then, some games you can get a world record without doing those strats, and you're just better off improving your movement or some other aspects of the run. A while back when I did that one challenge when I learned how to speedrun Ocarina of Time defeat Ganon in 1 week, I opted to go for the slower old Kakariko route rather than the one that uses get item manipulation to get the bottle in the Deku tree, because I feel like that was a little bit hard to learn within 1 week, and I just wanted to get the ball rolling and learn the run in a few hours. So I deliberately chose a route that was a minute slower because it was just more beginner friendly to me. Being overly supportive when a runner that's been around for a while gets a mediocre time, or hyping them up, does more bad than good, makes you look dishonest, and has negative impact on that runner's development. I could kinda see it if the runner refuses to learn certain strats or isn't practicing enough, but if they're really trying but just can't break through a certain mental barrier or a literal minute barrier, I don't think that's the kind of attitude you need to have towards people. I get what you mean by being overly supportive, but at the same time, the fact that they're sticking around the community speaks volumes, even if they are in a period of stagnation. Ooh, we've got a take from a big guy, Linkus7. Accessibility and fun is more important than the purity of a speedrun. I kinda covered this already with some of my previous takes, but I 100% agree because a lot of people forget that speedrunning is supposed to be fun, and making it easier for people to get into without making it outright cheating should be encouraged more often. 7-hour JRPG runs are just playthroughs. Oh really? They're just playthroughs. You know what? Here's a copy of Final Fantasy VII. I want you to just try to play it and beat the whole thing in 7 hours. Doesn't matter if the world record is just under 7 hours, just do it. It's just a playthrough, nothing more to it. Speedrunning should be able to exist simultaneously as a fun hobby and as an esport. I don't give an F about what you think an esport should constitute. Some speedrunners push themselves to the breaking point to optimize and improve at their games. More orgs need to pick up speedrunners. This is a take from Lumilora, the current Spyro 1 world record holder. And she makes a pretty interesting point because there has been some attempts recently to make speedrunning more esports-like. Recently, we've been seeing a lot of people try to legitimize speedrunning as a esports-like competition, especially with the advent of the LTA format, or known as limited time attack. In an LTA, speedrunners have a limited amount of time to complete their best run. They usually start off with a no reset run, and then they do their further runs and they're allowed to reset until they reach a point at the end in which they cannot reset anymore and have to finish their current run. This format began in early 2020 when the ESA invited 7 SM64 runners to do a 120-star LTA for 3 days, basically inventing the format, in which we saw Cheese, who was signed to CLG at the time, get the world record live on stage. This format was even replicated by a different marathon, Pace, which is a competition-focused marathon rather than just showcase speedruns. I went to the most recent event myself, and there were 3 games that were featured as LTAs for 1 day, and 120-star for the last 3 days of the event. I feel like this format has a lot of potential for a lot of speed games, and I would like to see organizations like GSA, who run Pace, cover more games as well, from various different consoles and platforms, because I think a lot of communities would benefit for that. As for signing people to esports organizations, esports is in kind of a weird place right now, but I think if you're like a really good streamer and you stream to a large audience and whatnot, have a good personality, make good content, that's the kind of value that a lot of organizations are looking for these days. So I feel like getting signed to an esports org isn't as easy as just being good at a speed game. You gotta make sure you provide some content value to them. Because otherwise, I 100% agree with you, and I would love to see it, because I love these competition formats so much. Randomizers aren't speed runs. 100% agree. Thank you. Now, I'm not saying that randomizers are bad, far from it. I just think that as speedruns, you can't really compare one randomizer seed to another, because unlike the vanilla game which stays consistent, a randomizer seed is just too different to be considered a speedrun in the traditional sense. You could have randomizer races where you race the same seed, or showcase a randomizer and set an estimate like at a GDQ event, and those can be fun, but inherently, randomizers are just different from speedruns. Same applies to stuff that I really like bingo. It's speedrun adjacent, but it's not a speedrun in the traditional sense. Randomizers are not a replacement for speedruns in my opinion. You can never replace speedruns with randomizers. It just means your interest has just changed because you just don't find any interest in the main categories, and that's perfectly fine. Speedrunners care way too much about a runner's history and will fixate it on an extraordinary long time. Whether it be worshipping top runners for having a fast time, or constantly harassing/mocking people for decades over things they've done in the past. It's creepy. At times like this, you always have to remember that speedrunners are just normal people that are very good at games. And sometimes I do find the idol worship kind of creepy. But I've made videos in the past where I've given huge applause to certain speedrunners, and I felt like I put them on a pretty high pedestal just for hitting buttons fast. As a content creator, I sometimes just have to reflect and think, am I part of the problem? Speedrunning is about 20% skill and the effort you put in, and 80% available time to do so. This is so true. I think speedrunning just values a lot of people that have the free time to put in attempts and practice. Because that's where a lot of the time goes, not just doing attempts, but actually practicing the runs and grinding the runs in your free time. And I don't often have the free time to do so. Otherwise, I'd be much better speedrunner than I really am. Too many people overly praise the record holder, but neglect all the other great players that are just as capable. On some popular leaderboards, the top 20 or even further are equally as capable if they wanted to put the time in to grind. You know what? To prove this point, I'm gonna ask you, the audience, something. Have you seen Summoning Salt's world record history on Mario 64 16 star? Okay, I see quite a few hands in the audience, yes. Now, how many of you know who GTM is? Much fewer hands. You should be ashamed of yourselves. He's a pretty cool dude in 5th place on the leaderboard. Also pretty funny guy. You have no say on the rule changes of a category unless you've run the category within the past year, minimum. The YouTube comments think they have power over actual speedrunners in the community. Imagine if we let random YouTube commenters write the rules on speedrunning. Yeah, I don't think so. Speedruns that rely on glitches and breaking the game are objectively less impressive than speedruns that engage with the gameplay and show a high level of knowledge/skill with the game. In that sense, I could see why you find a movement-based speedrun that uses an intended route much more interesting, easier to follow, and more impressive than one that sequence breaks a whole bunch and uses a bunch of really broken glitches. I feel like I'm retreading old ground with this one, but I feel like there's still a different kind of impressive that you can see viewing glitched runs. On one hand, doing runs that focus on movement might be more rewatchable and interesting to watch over and over again, but on the other hand, you can't deny that glitched runs are very, very impressive on their own right, because it required a lot of knowledge to find these glitches. Some of these glitches require a lot of in-game knowledge to perform, and even if you're not gonna rewatch it over and over again, there's that wow factor whenever you watch like a new speedrun category and think, did that just happen? But really, the type of speedruns you might find interesting depends on person to person, and no person is in the wrong for preferring one type of speedrun over the other. Both are equally valid. Popular Undertale YouTuber and speedrunner Shay says, "You have 4th place in a game thousands of people have run. Your PB is not bad. Stop it." It's just an interesting phenomenon whenever you see really talented speedrunners say, "This run sucks." I feel like most people kind of joke about it. Some people are way too hard on themselves sometimes. But at the end of the day, it just really means that the runner has high expectations and standards for themselves, and they haven't just quite met it yet. I can understand it being annoying, but sometimes it's really endearing hearing someone like Enop say, "This run sucks." There's actually a fantastic video on this exact topic by Average Trey that I highly recommend checking out after you finish watching this video. Speedrunning YouTuber Bismuth says, "Speedrunning games on day 1 is robbing you of an experience you won't get back." Unfortunately, there are people that decide to speedrun games on day 1 as soon as they get their hands on the copies. It's actually a lot more common for speedrunning communities nowadays to impose an embargo on a new game, in which a leaderboard is probably closed for about 1 to 2 weeks within a game's release, and then after that time period ends, people can submit their times on the leaderboard. This incentivizes people to enjoy their time with the game within that time period before sinking their teeth deep into the speedrun. New speedrunners, or normies interested in it, need to shut up and observe because so many of y'all have absolutely no knowledge of our norms or culture. Also, documentary culture has ruined how newcomers view speedrunning. Yeah, unfortunately it's true because there's a lot of people that just can't read the room in terms of what speedrunning actually is. People often think it's only the top runners that matter without thinking about there's an entire community around it. I try my best to be informative now, although in the past I can see where I've been a little bit too idol worshipy. Discord is a horrible platform for resource organization. Again, it is quite a tragedy how many speedrun communities require you to join a Discord in order to get access to easy learning materials and whatnot. Each speed game really should have dedicated resources on their speedrun.com page, or a special wiki that has all the strats and information that you'll need, because Discord, at the end of the day, is just an IRC chat. It's not a good place to archive stuff, especially since people will delete videos out of the blue, users will get deleted, who knows if Discord is even going to exist a while. It's just better to keep it independent and have the resources open to the public, and not force them to just join a Discord server. I really hope that more speedrun communities look into posting more of their stuff in a wiki, because I love when certain communities do that. Alright, one more for the road. And this last hot take of the day comes from yours truly. GSR is one of the worst names for a speedrun category. Whenever I explain what Ganondorf source requirement means, I feel like a GameStop employee trying to explain to someone's mom how the Wii U is an entirely different console from the Wii. For those uninitiated, Ocarina of Time has a speedrun category currently called GSR, which stands for Ganondorf Source Requirement. Now, what the hell does that mean? You cannot use certain glitches to write those items in your inventory or obtain them using unintentional means. You have to get them from their original location, from where you would get them in a normal playthrough. You can use a lot of glitches to get to those places, but you have to get those items from their original locations and then use those to enter Hyrule Castle and defeat Ganondorf. The original name of this category was No RBA or Wrong Warp, which means you cannot use the glitches Reverse Bottle Adventure or Wrong Warp to get items in your inventory or use the Wrong Warp to reach the end of the game and skip Ganondorf. This was later renamed to No I Am Wrong Warp after the discovery of Get Item Manipulation, which could be used to get the bottle and light arrows from the Deku Tree, and so that was classified under Item Manipulation alongside RBA. The purpose of this category was to create a speedrun where the route remained consistently the same, even with the advent of new tricks. But the category was eventually renamed GSR to reflect its requirements rather than its restrictions after a hot debate on whether blue warp cutscene skips at the end of Shadow and Spirit Temples counted as wrong warps even though they were just cutscene skips, and they're not wrong warps at all. From a community perspective, I understand the name change. From the perspective of an audience, I think it's a terrible name change. I feel like renaming it to any % no major glitches or just no major glitches is a much more straightforward and easy to understand for the audience. It might sound weird because it uses the Door of Time skip to completely skip the child dungeons, as well as various sequence breaks and glitches and whatnot, but those aren't as major as manipulating your inventory or using wrong warps and whatnot. GSR was a name made before the discovery of SRM and ACE in late 2019. So in that sense, renaming it GSR was less of a headache for the OOT community. At the same time, I can't help but personally prefer the way that Majora's Mask does it, in which the community opts to name their any % no major glitches category just no major glitches, along with 100%, with variations such as any % unrestricted and 100% no pointer manipulation. And I feel like just calling it no major glitches is just much more easier for the audience to understand than GSR. Although I completely understand the reasoning of why the OOT community voted on that. And I didn't have a say on it, and I'm not going to demand it be changed. I just personally think that it's a stupid name. That's all.